Hey viewers, this is E36 Fanatics, and today I'm going to do a quick video on shock replacement on a BMW E36. The shocks on these cars, of course, are in the rear, and to get to the shock towers you have to go into the convertible top trunk area. You have this little plastic cover over it, which you can just pop off with a screwdriver. The other thing you want to do is remove this. It's just a little balloon rubber piece at the top of the strut mount. It actually covers a third bolt up here, which is not a 13. So you have four bolts total to, or four nuts total to remove the shock on this car. You have two on here, and here, which are 13 millimeters. Then you have this one right here, which is either a 15 or a 16, I do believe. And then you have the big one at the bottom, which is the main issue, which is right here, which is a 17 millimeter. Or no, sorry, it's an 18 millimeter. It's really not that bad, but I do throw some penetrating oil on it before, or PB Blast or whatever you got, just to help out with removing that one, because that one's a little bit tougher. Okay, so like I said, there's a lot of torque on this bottom bolt right here. So what I did is I had to crank out the beast, which is my big breaker bar I use for bolts when they're really on there, or really big ones. So once you get it broken, if you've got a beast like this, a really big breaker bar to do that, then you can switch to a smaller one, and then it becomes as easy as turning it out with your hand. So besides that, however, you need to know that when you're doing this job, you need to have a jack underneath your control arm right here. And the reason for that is your shock basically does the same thing as the struts in the front. So it holds up your rotor and your hub assembly, basically. So you need something to support this once the shock is removed. So once you got that bottom one done, go ahead and remove these three bolts. And I mean, it's as easy as just turning them out. They're not torqued very high, so they're pretty easy to remove. So just get these three bolts off, and the shock will just fall out the bottom. And it's as easy as that with replacing these shocks. Okay, so here's the shock that I just pulled out, and here's the new one I got. It's just an OEM Spectrum, but they're a little bit cheaper, but hey, yeah, they work just fine. So here I'm gonna show you the difference between the broken one here and then the new one here. Okay, so as you can tell, and then you look at this shock. Now, once you press it in, the shock is supposed to come up. It's supposed to come back up. Now look at this old shock right here. It's fried. It doesn't even come back up. It's got no air left in it to when it compresses, so it can shoot back up. You see this new one, it's coming back up just fine. You'll see a difference between the sports shocks and the regular shocks. Now, regular shocks like this, they're just day-to-day shocks. You see how it slowly comes back up and it wasn't very hard to press in. Now that's a regular driving shock. Now if you want to go sports, they're going to be much stiffer, and they're much harder to press in, and then they're going to shoot back up with a lot more force. Also, this bolt in the middle, you don't need to actually remove it unless you're keeping the shock mount. I am not keeping the shock mount on this one because it's probably about 21 years old now, so I wasn't that cheap. I went ahead and got another one. So when you removed your old shock, you'll notice two things about it. You'll notice that it's got this dust boot on it that unless you bought a new one, you're going to want to remove and put on your new one. And you're going to notice that this center bolt holds in the old shock mount. Now, if you're using a new shock mount, you don't need to remove this bolt on the old one. You can just trash it. The issue is if you want to use this old boot, you got to remove the shock mount to remove the boot. And when you do this, or when you're looking at this old shock, take a look at the orientation of the shock mount. Because usually it's got a brass plate at the bottom, then it's got another one at the top, and then it's got the shock mount in the middle. Make sure you watch on the old shock mount how far the nut is threaded on this bolt right here. You're gonna want to try and get it close to the old shock mount, how it was threaded on there, and the same thing for the old pattern on the two top bolts. Now what I did is I just looked at the other shock mount, since of course I'm replacing both of the shocks. I looked at the shock on the other side to see how far it was threaded on these two bolts here. And then you can just follow that and thread it accordingly. I'm gonna go ahead and mount this new shock. It's pretty straightforward. You've got your hole here that you're gonna mount into like so. Then you've got your hole here that you're gonna mount and thread your 18mm in. I thread in the 18mm first before I play with the top. While you still have the shock holding or sitting on the control arm, and once you've got this 18mm threaded at the bottom, the shock may very well not reach the top enough for you to thread it. So what you're gonna want to do is you're gonna want to raise your jack a little bit so it'll go through the top here, and then you can go to the top and go ahead and finish and go ahead and thread in these little 13mm. Once you got that done, you can go ahead and tighten the two. Also, as a word of caution, this center bolt right here that holds in the shock mount, make sure you tighten that up before you start placing the new shock. Don't try and place the new shock while it's still not tightened down. It's very, very difficult to try and tighten it down at that point. Okay, so once you've got your new one ready to go, and I went ahead and threw on the old boot on it. That's the only thing I saved. And once you've got the whole thing together, so now what you do is you want to put back on this cap here. This cap is to just keep stuff out, and it's kind of a silencer as well. Pretty easy to get back in really. You throw back on this plastic cap, and voila, that is two new shocks put in. Also here, I just used a breaker bar to turn the bolt a few times at the end. It's probably a good idea to throw some blue Loctite on it. I don't really like using anything tougher than that. Red or yellow would make this near impossible to get off without breaking your back.